High interest rates and punishing mortgages could last for a generation. So warns Jim Grant, one of the best analysts out there and noted expert on the Great Depression. Despite the Fed's laying out the champagne last week, in an interview with Forbes, Grant warns that payback for a decade of unsustainable cheap money will be brutal, and it could continue for many years, even decades. Now, Grant has followed the sordid goings-on of the Federal Reserve in his Interest Rate Observer for over 40 years. He is best known for predicting the 2008 crisis to a T, and he knows Austrian economics like the back of his hand. Grant argues the Fed went off the rails after 2008, launching 15 years of cheap money that blew a bubble that is in the process of popping. They blew it using near-zero interest rates. That makes it cheap or free to borrow money. And they blew it with so-called quantitative easing, where the Fed goes out and buys everything in sight, minting fresh new money on Excel sheets and flooding it out as inflation. Together, these led to parabolic increases in debt, with corporate debt going from $7 trillion to $14 trillion, household debt going from $13 to $17, and federal debt going from $10 trillion to $34 trillion between 2008 and today. For those following along at home, that is $35 trillion in fresh debt, so $500,000 for a family of four. Of course, a lot of that free money flooded into markets, setting off the party of the century. Housing doubled, stocks jumped sixfold. It was the everything bubble, kind of like the 1920s. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained. So far, we have only seen the shoe drop on the bubble in regional banks and commercial real estate. Everything else is merrily floating on gossamer, partying like it is 1929. That's because houses are frozen since buyers won't sell. Stocks just got another bump of coke thanks to Jerome Powell's giant punch bowl. Meanwhile, companies are chomping at the bit to borrow yet more. Even consumers are plowing deeper into debt, with credit cards just hitting a near record, and buy now, pay later soaring in double digits over the year. Put it together, and Jim thinks we are headed for a crunch as the Fed keeps rates high because of inflation for longer than the market expects, meaning all that debt will become unsustainable for consumers, companies, and the banks who lent it all. As Mark Spitznagel sums up, this is, quote, the greatest credit bubble in human history. In recent videos, I've mentioned that 15 years of easy money historically buys you a permanent zombie economy, Japan being the poster child. The corporate bankruptcies here in America are already soaring, up 30% on the year, hitting 516 in the 9 months to September, which is higher than any full year since the 2008 crisis. If Jim is right, we are due for decades of slow growth, high mortgages, stubborn inflation, and periodic financial crashes, all punctuated by trillion-dollar handouts from the Fed and its enablers in Washington. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.